Okay, go ahead. We're at chapter 20.
We are at chapter 20, and I'm going to read you the first 6 verses first, and then we're going to go back and talk about what this involves. It's called millennialism. We need to understand what that means before we proceed on through.
Not this new generation, the millennials?
No, heavens no.
Okay.
And I saw an angel coming down out of heaven, having the key to the abyss, and holding in his hand a great chain. He seized the dragon, that ancient serpent, who is the devil, or Satan, and bound him for 1,000 years. He threw him into the abyss, and locked and sealed it over him to keep him from deceiving the nations any more, until the 1,000 years were ended. After that, he must be set free for a short time. I saw thrones on which were seated those who had been given authority to judge. And I saw the souls of those who had been beheaded because of their testimony for Jesus and because of the word of God. They had not worshipped the beast or his image, and had not received his mark on their foreheads or their hands. They came to life and reigned with Christ 1,000 years. The rest of the dead did not come to life until the 1,000 years were ended. This is the first resurrection. Blessed and holy are those who have part in the first resurrection. The second death has no power over them, but they will be priests of God and of Christ and will reign with him for 1,000 years.
So there were no marks on the Christians, only the beast crowd, right?
Yes, the mark of the beast was on the forehead of the ones who were free from the beast were written in the book of life. Okay. We need to take a little bit of time here to discuss the meaning of this 1,000-year thing, properly called millennialism. And what it's all about, for 1,000 years before the end.
Of life or the end of the world?
The end of the world. The end of everything as we know it. Christ will reign for 1,000 years upon the earth in a kingdom of his saints. And then after that comes the final struggle. The general resurrection of all, the last judgment, and the final consummation, none of which takes place until Christ has reigned for 1,000 years. Now, you need to understand, this was a very common belief in the early church. Today, there's still a few people around who still believe it. But it is not mainstream, and this, in chapter 20 in Revelation, is the only place in the New Testament that teaches the 1,000-year bit.
Y2K.
Okay. Hmm?
Y2K.
Yes.
Those people.
No. You know, I could go on for a while about that too. When we hit the year 2000, you remember that it was going to be the end of the world and, and all this kind of thing. And when you stop to really think about it, time as we measure it in hours and days and weeks and months and years is 100% a man-made invention. Okay? So to say that the world is going to end at midnight on a certain date
Hi, Frank.
is foolishness, because that's just an arbitrary time concocted by the mind of persons. Time itself is a continuum. You know, it just flows.
Did anybody tell Al Gore?
Anyway, let's not get started on that. So here's what happens. The devil is thrown into the abyss. Those who were martyred for Christ will reign with him. Then the devil gets released from the abyss. A final struggle occurs. There is a general resurrection of all the dead. The devil then gets defeated for good. Those in the book of life enter into blessedness, and everybody else is cast into the lake of fire. The end.
There's 2 more chapters, though.
Oh yes, there are.
Way to go, Pat.
The origin of this whole concept of millennialism, the 1,000-year reign, okay, is all found in Jewish beliefs. But it's not called millennialism in Jewish history, it's called the Messianic Age. That's where it finds its roots. And this was very prevalent from about 100 BC on. The Jews had been thinking and hoping and praying for a Messiah for many, many centuries. But as the centuries go by, all of their thinking about what's going to happen keeps evolving and changing. Keeps changing and evolving until you get down to about 100 years before Christ. Their description of the Messianic Age was a whole lot different than what it started out to be. Okay? Initially, in Jewish theology, God's kingdom would be established and last forever. But along about 100 BC in that area, it was finally decided that the world was so messed up, that the world was so evil,
they decided it was messed up.
and that the kingdom of God will never happen. It's never going to happen. Okay? Rather, there would be a limited time, a limited reign, after which final destruction of this evil world would occur. And it's only after that that the eternal time of the goodness of God can occur. Okay? And this is the way Jewish thought evolved. Now, estimates of this messianic reign, oh, they were all over the wall. Some thought it would be 40 years, some thought it would be 7,000 years, you know. And while this reign was to be a time of righteousness, it was also described in terms of material blessings. For example, the reign of righteousness, the earth also shall, oh, some of you are going to love this. Pat, Linda.
Oh, be full of wine.
Frank. The earth also shall yield its fruit 10,000-fold.
Ooh.
On each vine there shall be 1,000 branches.
Yeah, we love that.
Yeah, and each branch shall produce 1,000 clusters. And each cluster shall produce 1,000 grapes. And each grape 120 gallons of wine.
Oh my gosh!
He's swimming in this stuff.
Is this gonna?
I mean, we're talking here about...
Is this gonna be in all of our yards?
I couldn't outlive that bush.
By the way, that particular description comes from the 29th chapter of 2nd Baruch.
Oh, Baruch.
Here's another one. There will be no more disease, no more untimely death. The beasts will be friendly with humans, and women will have no pain in childbirth.
Oh,
So,
well, I'm past that, so that doesn't make me too happy.
So this is meant to describe this 1,000-year messianic, or 40-year to 7,000-year messianic reign. So this is the background for the millennium concept. The majority of the early Christians believed it. They accepted this idea of the 1,000-year reign, although there were some who never did. Most of the basis for this thinking are rooted in 3 intertestamental books: 2nd Baruch, Enoch, and 2nd Esdras. Remember now, the Old Testament ends a century or so before Christ. So all of the intertestamental writings are where this concept of Messianic age are being evolved at this time. With the, what was the last minor prophet? Micah?
Micah.
Yeah, Micah's the last book.
That's where the Old Testament stops. So this is a continuing development of the concept. But finally, I should mention this too. There are also a number of early writings from the early Christian church that have survived that support the millennial concept. Now, you've probably never heard of any of these four people, but their writings have survived to this day, and their names were Eusebius, Irenaeus, Papias, and Nepos. You all know, familiar
Oh,
with
yeah,
those?
very.
I ever have truth.
Nemo?
Yeah.
Nemo?
Nepos.
Oh,
Oh.
The Greeks.
But finally,
Fish.
finally, this concept of millennialism is dealt practically a death blow by somebody you would know and recognize, St. Augustine. Because in his writings, he took this whole idea of millennialism and completely spiritualized it. So that it wasn't actual events that was going to occur, it was a spiritual evolution that was going to occur. To make a long story short, the idea was never universally accepted by the church. A lot of people rejected it. And while it is not extinct in the church today, it is certainly not mainstream. And the best way it can be characterized is to say this is an eccentricity of Christian belief. Okay? All right? Now that we've got that, we go back and start over. And I saw an angel coming down from heaven, having the key to the abyss and holding a chain in his hand, a great chain. He seized the dragon, that ancient serpent who is the devil or Satan, and bound him for 1,000 years. He threw him into the abyss and locked and sealed it over him to keep him from deceiving the nations anymore until the 1,000 years were ended. After that, he must be set free for a short time. The abyss, remember, is supposed to be a vast underground cavern where the dead are sent. It's also a place where, in Jewish thinking, where special sinners are kept waiting, waiting, and waiting. And it was in this abyss that the devil is cast. And the devil's really apparently feared this the most because once you were sealed in, there's no escape. And it says here, Satan is sealed in. And he's to be locked in there for 1,000 years. Okay, it was customary also in that time for the number 1,000 to mean a very long time. It doesn't necessarily mean exactly 1,000 years. It means for a very long time. So after a very long time, then the devil is to be let loose for a brief period of time. What's that? Yeah, why?
Yeah.
What's that all about? All I can do is give you a possible meaning because even the experts aren't sure. But this is a possible meaning. In a period of complete peace, 1,000 years, complete righteousness, complete goodness, complete peace. No opposition exists. No evil exists. People would come to take their faith automatically without thinking. There's no comparison. Okay? You get the point? If there is no evil, how do you know what's good?
We'd all be robots.
Yeah, right. Right, there's nothing, it's like you can't have life without death, you can't have good without evil, you got to have a comparative thing. So the loosing of the devil would therefore be kind of like a testing time for the Christians to see if the reality of their faith has been preserved and they really still understand the difference. I can't give you any better description of that than that. That's the best I could find. So, pick your own poison on that one.
That does sort of make sense.
Well, it sort of does, and I'm not sure it does. I mean, Okay. I saw thrones on which were seated those who had been given authority to judge, and I saw the souls of those who had been beheaded because of their testimony to Jesus and because of the word of God. They had not worshipped the beast or his image, and had not received his mark on their foreheads or their hands. They came to life and reigned with Christ 1,000 years. The rest of the dead did not come to life until the 1,000 years were ended.
Now, if you saw all these people, and the ones that had been beheaded, and they didn't have the mark the mark on their forehead. I'm confused.
Yeah, where's the mark?
Where's the mark? Where's
Well,
their head?
Yeah, well, they, the ones that were beheaded didn't have the mark of the beast.
Because they
That's
didn't have
because
a
they didn't
head.
have a head.
They didn't have a head.
That was after the fact. This is the first resurrection. In the first resurrection, only those people who have suffered and died for the faith are raised. In other words, they get a special privilege. And that's because of their special loyalty to Christ, even unto death. And it turns out there are two classes of these people, these folks. There are those who have been martyred, suffering a cruel, vicious, horrible death. But there's a second group, and that's those persons who did not worship the beast, do not have the mark on their foreheads. Those folks who suffered persecution, they may have been thrown in prison, they may have had their lives ruined and all that for Christ, but they weren't martyred. Those folks are called confessors. So these folks who are going to be raised in the first resurrection, because of their loyalty to Christ, either the martyrs or the confessors, have a special privilege. They receive the privilege also of judgment. You know, the idea is that in this world, the Christians were under judgment by man. In the world to come, the roles are reversed. Those who were the judges are going to be judged. I think the best stance to take as we go through the rest of this, John is trying to describe something that can't be described. That's where I'm coming from.
And he's not doing a very good job.
Well, he's trying to describe a series of events or happenings or futures or whatever you want to call it that can't be described really. And so, you know, we start thinking, well, you know, a lot of this sounds like nonsense, but he's just desperately trying to encourage and give hope to the people who are being persecuted. So, you know, it's really hard to follow this thing through because you find yourself saying, oh, come on, that can't be real. You know, that's not going to happen. And you keep saying these kind of things to yourselves, but it's all supposed to be symbolically descriptive of events that we really are not privy to, that can't be described. It's kind of like somebody saying to you, oh, I think it would be wonderful to go to heaven after I die. Explain to me what it's like in heaven. Well, over the centuries, people have come up with all kinds of pictures and descriptions of heaven. There's even several of them in the New Testament, you know, with the streets of gold and the big mansions and all this kind of thing.
They'd probably be slick and you'd slip on the
Well,
fall.
it's the same thing. They're trying to describe something that cannot be described. So we let our imaginations run wild. We come up with everything we can think of, but still we can't really accurately describe what it is because it can't be described. In chapter 20, verse 6, it goes on to say, blessed and holy are those who have part in the first resurrection. The second death has no power over them. But they will be priests of God and of Christ and will reign with him for 1,000 years. In other words, those who were true to Christ, the confessors and the martyrs, when loyalty cost them everything, including their lives, death has been vanquished. They will not suffer the second death, which has no power over them. And they are priests of God, granted free access into God's presence, and they will reign with Christ forever, well, not forever, but in the 1,000-year reign. Well, so much for the millennium.
Thank goodness.
The second part of chapter 20 has to do with Satan's doom, the destruction of the devil. When the 1,000 years are over, Satan will be released from his prison and will go out to deceive the nations in the four corners of the earth, Gog and Magog, to gather them for battle. Everybody remember Gog and Magog?
No, I don't.
We'll go back.
Back
and
then, the earth was still
review that
flat.
real quick.
That's right.
To gather them for battle. In number they are like the sand on the seashore. They marched across the breadth of the earth and surrounded the camp of God's people, the city he loves,
Jerusalem.
Jerusalem. But fire came down from heaven and devoured them. And the devil who deceived them was thrown into the lake of burning sulfur, where the beast and the false prophet had already been thrown. They will be tormented day and night forever and ever. And they got what they deserved.
Yeah.
Okay, the 1,000 years ends. The devil is let loose from the abyss. He takes up exactly where he left off. He assembles the nations of the world for a final attack, a final assault on God, on the city of God, Jerusalem. This idea of a final attack on Jerusalem by hostile nations, oh, that is so Jewish, it isn't even funny. And it goes back into all kinds of places in the Old Testament, Daniel and Zechariah just being two, where they describe this final assault on Jerusalem. But they don't succeed. They are destroyed by God himself. What's the deal with Gog and Magog? Nobody remembers that, huh?
Well, I remember we
You
talked
remember the
about
names?
it, but I don't remember where they came from.
Okay.
Aren't they monsters in Japanese movies?
Yeah.
Well, you know what? That's not far from the truth. You come to think about it. Okay, this is a picture that etched itself very deeply, if mysteriously, I guess, into Jewish thought. And it's first brought up in Ezekiel, chapter 38. There, Gog of the land of Magog, the chief prince of Meshech and of Tubal, is to launch the great attack upon Israel and is to be, in the end, utterly destroyed. It may be that originally Gog was connected with the Scythians, whose invasions everybody feared. As time went on, in Jewish thought, Gog and Magog came to stand for everything that is anti-God. So, the rabbis taught that Gog and Magog, everything that is anti-God, would assemble themselves and their forces against Jerusalem and would fall by the hand of the Messiah. So this is the roots for that coming out of there. The hostile armies under the devil's leadership are consumed with fire from heaven. The devil is cast into the lake of fire to share the same fate as the beast and the false prophet. God's judgment is complete.
The Scythians would have been then from
Northeast
east.
of Rome.
They were the same fearless cavalry that Nero was supposed to bring back.
Armenia.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Were they
Yeah.
related to the Parthians?
Yes, the same group. That's the same area up in there. Those were very, very brutal, very aggressive, very powerful, military-minded folks.
German Huns.
No,
East of the.
They're east of that.
The Visigoths, for
Oh,
sure.
okay.
yeah. They also came down and did Rome in eventually too. They killed the beast, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the harlot was given her just desserts.
And glass of wine.
Yes. Okay, the last part of chapter 20 has to do with the final judgment. How are we doing here? Okay. Then I saw...
You turned 2 pages.
I did?
I
Are
think
you
somebody's keeping
confusing
an
me,
eye on
Frank?
you.
No, I'm okay. I'm fine. Then I saw a great white throne and him who was seated on it. Earth and sky fled from his presence, and there was no place for them. And I saw the dead, great and small, standing before the throne, and books were opened. Another book was opened, which is the book of life. The dead were judged according to what they had done, as recorded in the books. You probably don't like that as a Methodist, do you? The sea gave up the dead that were in it, and death and Hades gave up the dead that were in them, and each person was judged according to what he had done. Then death and Hades were thrown into the lake of fire. The lake of fire is the second death. If anyone's name was not found written in the book of life, he was thrown into the lake of fire.
Oh my goodness.
You know, at the surface value, this is just about as anti-Methodist as it could possibly get, saving yourself on the basis of good deeds, you know, is what it sounds like, instead of
Works.
instead of the grace of God.
That's what they believed back then.
Faith alone.
But there is a different way to look at it, which you can
Big
cannot
surprise
accept.
here.
First of all, I think it's quite amazing that when God comes in his final judgment, it's going to be in Zion National Park.
Where did it say that? Did I miss that?
The
when you
Great
said
White
that?
Throne.
Oh,
That's
yeah,
Mormon's
they're,
Great White Throne.
Well, the Great White Throne's a big granite formation in Zion
Right.
National Park,
Oh,
right?
yeah, right.
Let's go up there this weekend and wait for
Never
him.
mind.
Could be Mount Charleston
Sure it's not a
this week.
snowbank.
Take some sea ration.
Anyway, God sits on his great white throne, which symbolizes unapproachable purity, in order to judge. This seems to conflict with a number of references in the New Testament that Jesus is to be the judge. But that also conflicts with our understanding that Jesus is not going to be the judge, but Jesus is going to be our advocate before the judge. Okay? So all of this is kind of confusing in my mind. What I understand and what I've been taught is that as we stand before the throne of God, if we have accepted Christ, it is Jesus that is our advocate and will argue for us on our behalf before God's throne, which is very reassuring.
Oh, he's
Yeah,
good.
yes.
What about the sheep and the goats?
Well, from what I understand, the sheep are the ones who are in the book of life and go to blessedness, and the goats are thrown into the lake of fire after judgment.
Goat roast.
Goat roast.
Popular with the Jamaicans. Had a friend that raised goats.
Well, whatever, the whole background of this book of Revelation, remember, is Jewish. To a Jew, God and only God could be the judge. And even if you were a Jew and converted to Christianity, boy, most Jews still felt that way. God would be the judge.
Well, if you believe that Jesus and God are one and the same, then
If you're a monotheist.
Now that gets into the whole mystery of the Trinity.
mm-hmm.
Judgment begins with the passing away of the present world. Earth and sky are gone, and this idea is expressed in both the Old and New Testaments. I'll give you just two examples. From Isaiah 51, the heavens will vanish like smoke, the earth will wear out like a garment. And one from the New Testament, from the 13th chapter of Mark, which I know you all have heard. Heaven and earth will pass away. Then comes the judgment of mankind, every single person, great or small. And there are two books mentioned here, used for judgment. There's the book of deeds. This is the idea that God keeps a record on all of our deeds. And the way that Barclay says to look at this is not that you're earning your way by doing good deeds, but that throughout our lives we are actually writing our own destiny. Okay? We're actually writing our own judgment. by what we do and what we don't do in life. And references for this basic concept can be found not only in the Old Testament in places like Daniel, but also from Enoch, Baruch, Ezra, and also, they say, in the Apocalypse of Baruch, which I'm not even familiar with. The second is the Book of Life. As we have mentioned before, kings and rulers in those times in the ancient world kept a roll book of their citizens. All of the people who lived in their kingdom that belonged to that king, he kept a record. So the Book of Life becomes an accounting of those who belong to God and who are the living citizens of God's kingdom. Then we are told the sea will give up its dead. Now why would you think they would say that he would say that? The sea would give up its dead. What's the point of that? Widespread ancient belief was that if a person died and did not receive burial, their spirit would wander in a netherland for all eternity. So that those who died at sea would never be at rest or at peace. Their spirits would just wander for all time. So he's saying those who died at sea had no choice. But John is telling us that even those that died and were buried at sea will appear before God for judgment. No need to worry about them never being able to receive judgment. No matter how you die, in other words, you will receive either the punishment or the reward that you deserve. Finally, death and hell are thrown into the lake of fire. The voracious monsters of evil that have devoured so many are in the end themselves devoured. Death is vanquished for those listed in the Book of Life. Next week, we will be into chapter 21, and I don't know if we'll get all the way to chapter 22 or not. If we don't, we'll just postpone everything down a week. But chapter 21 deals entirely with the New Jerusalem, the new world. All things shall pass away, all things will be made new, and John goes on to describe what the new creation is going to be like. And then finally, when we get all the way down to chapter 22, the last week, it is devoted to the what is called the river of life and the coming of Jesus.